Hey guys, this is Kenny over at Mythic Studios. Wanted to welcome you guys back to our second Mythic Wartable podcast. Today we have myself, Sean, uh, Kurt, and we have our sound guy, our man in the shadows, Mr. Andrew Braverman, today, who's stubbing in for TJ. We have a bunch of cool topics we wanted to get into today, but before that, I wanted to at least introduce our other guest today, who is Mr. Andrew Braverman. Mr. Andrew.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I help out with media over on Team Battle Brothers, as well as doing the streams for Battle for Salvation at NetC and our GT at the end of the year.
Do you have any cool armies or specific armies you play, Andrew?
Right now, I'm all about Chaos. Always have been. I play a Thousand Suns focused Chaos list. Lately, I've been doing a lot of Chaos Knight and Chaos Space Marine allies with my Thousand Suns. I'm a big Discordant fan. I'm a big Double Melta Knight fan. I'm a big Helldrake fan. You know, just doing the works. So I'd say that's probably my favorite right now.
Another Chaos Man to replace the other Chaos guy. Perfect. And Andrew, how long have you been playing the game?
So I started towards the beginning of 7th edition. I found a love for it right around then, just dove right in. I'm lucky enough to be located right near Battle for Salvation Gaming Club in Westchester County, and that was my local club that I went to, and there's a very high level of competition there as far as competitive 40K goes, so it just kind of, that's the club I played at, so that's the level I rose to. We put on 2 big tournaments a year, so I started going to the GT and wound up streaming the GT. That's how I met Sean and the rest of the Battle Brothers guys, so, it just I led right into the competitive world.
Well, that's cool. I know that you know these guys for at least a couple of years, if not longer than that. So you fit right in, and I know you personally as well. We've met more than a couple of times, and always grateful for your help throughout these podcasts and everything else. So let's jump into it, boys. Uh, First, I wanted to tell you guys that I hope you guys are all good at home and still, being well from the pandemic. But the juicy topics we have for right now is how everyone really got started to playing 40K. Sean, you want to lead us in there, buddy?
Absolutely. So I'm 33 now, and that's a question mark. I usually have to ask my wife how
I'm
old we are
Ron
each.
Burgundy.
I have to ask her every year how old we are. I think I just turned 33. That's what I'm gonna go with for that age. So I've been playing for over 20 years, or 20 years, like on the dot this year. Yeah, because what's like 2001, so around 20 years.
What edition was that, Sean, when you first started?
Third edition.
Third edition.
Third edition was when I started. Um, there was a, it was freshman year of high school, where like early on in that year they have like the club or activities fair down in like the cafeteria where everybody like sets up like this is the rowing club or this club or blah blah blah, and we're walking around and there's this group that has these models on the table, and I was like, what is this? And they're like, oh, it's Warhammer 40K. We meet once a week, we play. I was like, this is super cool. And so me and like at least two of my other friends like looked into it. The war store was still open back then. I know actually, I think Neil has recently passed away, but that was a great thing back then when you could actually buy GW products online without, you know, not just from GW, like, and
Yeah.
like you could do like a web cart and all that. That was back in the day. They took all those things away. But yeah, so like the war store had like army deals, like, so I did some research on the GW website on like what I wanted to play with, and just like looking at pictures, what I thought was cool. We didn't know anything about the game when we picked our first armies. We did not know a thing. We didn't know what rules did. We didn't know anything. And I picked Eldar, and that's where that started.
Jesus. An Eldar player from the beginning? Oh my
From,
lord.
from the beginning.
In third edition. Were they broken in third edition?
I never lost a game in high school, so I don't know.
And that's really cool that like you were in high school at this point.
Yeah, I was a freshman in high school.
Was there it was just like a miniatures wargaming like club, or was it like people
Yeah,
from outside the school? Wow, that's
no,
awesome.
yeah, it was a club at our high school. It
That's
was run
really
by one of
cool.
the teachers who had a um, he was a good painter. He played Blood Angels. I actually built one of my first Wraith Lords, the old metal ones. The paint set back then, it still does, I think, or whatever. It came with like a random Space Marine. So I painted that guy up, Blood Angels colors, put it on the floor, put my Wraith Lord's foot on top of it, bent the fingers on the metal Wraith Lord so that it was given the middle finger.
That is awesome. Yeah.
Good Catholic school education. So.
Good. Yeah. Fuck Space Marines. How about you, Kurt?
I see there's a lot of repressed emotion there with that middle finger on the Wraith Lord, but sounds real nice.
I still have.
Exactly.
Not gonna lie. The first model I ever painted was a Warlock. I gave that model to like my wife in like college, and like she still has it on like her medicine or whatever makeup cabinet. Little Warlock sitting there.
So that's how you sealed the deal.
That's how I sealed the deal, Kurt. That's how you do it.
Just a
You're gonna
Warlock.
hear, folks.
Apparently that's the end.
If they accept you for your 40K hobby, then they're gold.
That is true. I can attest to that. So unfortunately, there's more than one OG Eldar player here. I actually started around the same time as Sean, but I didn't really play much when I was that old. I started around 2001, 2002. I actually can't remember the exact year because I was about 10 years old. My older brother and his squad of really cool friends who I thought were cool at the time basically played D&D in the basement every weekend, along with other cool games, like a lot of Soul Calibur, a lot of video game stuff like that on Dreamcast back in the day, and the GameCube. So basically, I hung around with them. I was that annoying little brother. And when they would set up a game of 40K with like 6 or 7 of them on like a big ping pong table downstairs in the basement, I would always bother them. And eventually my brother got me a Fire Prism, which was my first model. So that was my first model of the first army I played, but I didn't really have an army for about a year or two after that. Slowly putting together an army. Just because the models looked cool at the time. I was 10 years old. I didn't really know any better or anything about the fluff at that time. So I started off, Eldar were pretty damn strong back then, if I remember correctly. And I just played at a local game store during the summers, so my parents would drop me off for the day. I'd stay there for like 8-10 hours, and I'd call for a ride back at the end of the day, and they'd come pick me up. So I spent a summer or two doing that, and when I was around 13, 14 years old, and that's really how I started getting into the game. I didn't really get into the competitive stuff until well over a decade later. Then really just playing around. Had no idea there were even big tournaments. The biggest thing you'd go to is like a 5 or 10 man or 20 man small weekend RTT, and those would be considered a big deal back then because there was nothing that I knew of. So I really like the army. I still play it today. Last time, I still have that model. It's painted absolutely awful. I keep it in my parents' basement, and I don't bring it out. But I luckily pay homage to that by using Sean's old metal Fire Prism that I stole from his house.
which is equally as old.
Yes.
If not painted that old. I think I painted that model in college. That particular Fire Prism got painted in college. So
About a decade ago, give or take?
yeah, about a decade ago, give or take. So I had it for like maybe 16, 17 years. And I think it was painted one color. I just repainted it again in college, and that's where it is currently in its paint life. Because like that's the thing when you play this game for a long time, and it's one of the things I actually like about it is most of the models are still usable 20 years later. At a certain point they become vintage, classic models. So like Guardians that I've used competitively even like this year are the Guardians I bought in high school. And they've been repainted at least once, to get to where they are now. But it's crazy that you play this game for so long, and there's so many people that you run into where you're like, I've been playing this game since first edition, and the second edition, or whatever, and they still have models from back in the day, and they bring them out, and they're just really cool.
I do love seeing that. Like, I know I talked about it last podcast, there was a bunch of older guys at my old store. And when they broke out their stuff, it was like a lot of their stuff was like super well painted because they've been in the hobby for so long. And like, just when they brought out these older looking models, like I was just like, because I started in tail end 7th into 8th, and I really started playing, like looking at some of these older hunchback Terminators and like these like Space Marines that have like they always have this, not always the same pose, but they got the gun to their chest. Like, and then you put a Primaris Marine next to it, and you're like, what the hell is this? Looks like a guardsman.
No, absolutely. So what did you start with, Kenny? What brought you in?
So I was switching jobs at the time. I used to be like a manager at a GameStop, and then I left, and then you know I walked into my old store, and I knew somebody over there who I used to get Magic cards from, and he was leaving, and he helped me out with a job, and his whole job was actually doing all the miniature stuff. And I was actually going in there because I was trying to kill time and like had this nice paycheck from my old job, and I was like, you know what, I want to try and get into a hobby, and I always saw it over at the store. I was actually going to get into Sigmar because I thought like the fantasy stuff was really cool, and then he was like, no, you should definitely play Warhammer 40K, and I was like, why? And he was like, it's just cooler. There's the grim dark future about it. It's got this really appeal to it. And first thing I picked up was the old 7th edition Kill Team box. You guys remember that, where it's like Tau versus Space Marines? It had like the general rule book that you needed, so like it was an easy pickup. And I first built my first Space Marines. I know I hate to say it because I hate Space Marines, but I always thought the Space Marines are cool because they're like these genetically enhanced, like almost like demigods. And I went into playing Space Marines for a little bit. Then there was Tau in that box, so I played a lot of Tau at the end of 7th edition. And then I started going into other armies like Eldar and some Chaos in there. And when 8th edition came out, I went balls deep into freaking Death Guard because I love Chaos. And then I fell off, and now I play Eldar, and now I actually play really Dark Eldar is all I play currently because that's like the bee's knees right now for me.
Well,
But
don't worry about Space Marines. Like everybody, I think, has a Space Marine army. I've got a giant Space Marine army. Because soon after, I think the second year, like every Christmas, once I started playing 40K and was still in like high school and stuff like that, every Christmas I'd be like, oh, it's my Christmas list. It's these models, these models, these models, blah blah blah. And I soon realized that Eldar, you couldn't do anything to the models. Like at that point, most of their range was metal, and most of their units had like no options, no upgrades, no nothing. So like, from like a modeling perspective, they were awful. Like there was like no changes to the army you could really make. Like a couple models, like their tanks and stuff, could have different guns, but mostly everything, even their characters, were all like fixed war gear. So I soon was like, oh, I want to do something. And like, so this was the crazy part, is like I would exclusively play Eldar, and since we were like in a high school group, like it didn't matter if you were painted or not. There were no rules. There was no like even like etiquette, or there's nothing. We didn't care. We were just like, oh, put the models on the table, let's play. So like my Eldar army for years was not painted at all. And then I started buying Space Marines, and I never would play them. I would just paint them. So like I had an army that I would always play with that never got painted, and I had an army that I would never play with but would paint all the time and model and stuff like that. The Space Marines were one of like the few armies that was like had most of their range could be accessed in plastics. Towards the end of high school and getting into college, they got even some more new plastic kits. They were getting. I mean, anybody who's played
there's Space Marines.
Anybody who's played this game for more than a year can attest that Marines have probably gotten more kits in that year than any other army in the game. So,
For sure.
and so this is no exception. They would give new stuff all the time. So I have like legitimately a Marine army that's like hundreds of bodies strong in my basement that I played with for a brief amount of time during 5th edition. When I started going to tournaments, and like when you discovered tournaments, like I didn't even like Kurt, I didn't know there were tournaments when I was young. I stopped playing it altogether the first like 2 or 3 years of college, and then picked it back up towards the end of college, where I was like, oh, I want something to do in the apartment, not going out anymore. And so I brought my army up and started painting again, and then went out because there was actually a GW store in Hartford, Connecticut at the time, and that was close to my school up at UConn. So then I went in there, picked up a kit, talked to some people, and they were like, oh, we're having a tournament this weekend, or this or that. And I was like, oh, there's tournaments for this? Blah, blah. And then I started to like, dive into that research to like find gaming groups to get games in and start to play again. And when you go to tournaments at that point, and most tournaments do have some type of painting requirement. So I wasn't playing my Eldar. I was painting up some of it to get it to the tabletop, but I had Marines that were already painted, so that was my first real foray into like competitive play, was actually with my Marines in 5th edition.
And it clearly wasn't like your cup of tea, because now you're just, I mean, you've been a pure Eldar player. You were just playing it because of stipulations, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Eldar at that point were like really in the dumpster. It's not like
Hard.
8th edition. It's not like 8th edition where everybody gets codex. Their codex was old. Their codex was like
It was
early
years
4th
old.
or the early 4th edition old, and Marines obviously had a 5th edition codex because they're Marines.
Space Marine!
You know, so I was playing the Marines until Dark Eldar got a 5th edition codex is when I switched back to the
Was
Pointy
that their
Eaters.
first codex? The Dark
No,
Eldar?
No, they had a 3rd edition codex.
Yeah, the old one.
Oh yeah, the
It was-
classic.
It was, and they had all metal tanks. Not all, but that army was ridiculous.
Oh.
It looked cool as hell
Do
back
you
then.
have the Vect model? Like that Ravager, Sean?
Sean
I
is the
don't
Vect
have
model.
that model.
I mean, yes, he is the Vect model. You do not, you said?
No, I do not have that model.
Oh,
I've got all metal Taloses. I've got old metal Grotesques, like which are actually the size of racks now. Like,
really?
yeah, Grotesques were like an infantry-sized model at that point. I have metal Incubi. I've got metal witches. Like, yeah.
That's crazy.
You have the old metal Avatar, the tiny one.
I don't have
The
I don't
Phoenix
have that one. I don't have the infantry-sized one, but I have the current model, but it's
Yeah.
obviously metal, but mine is like.
I oddly enough have that old Avatar. Just to have it.
Just saying.
Paint it up and then give it back to me.
Yeah, so that I can use it and hide it inside buildings because it's so tiny.
Mm.
The big
I mean, you could
Cheating.
use that, right? In a tournament, it's technically legal, right?
That one would be a bridge too far.
It's real tiny. It's like Primaris. It's smaller than a Primaris.
It's smaller than it's like a Space Marine sized model.
Yeah.
Ugh.
At least
so
the other
funny.
one is like 2 inches tall.
Monstrous. Ish.
Ish.
But-
Monster light.
But that's
yeah,
it.
so like
Dark Eldar Codex was so good.
everybody has a Space Marine army. Kurt, you've had a Space Marine army.
Yeah, I did for a time, but I didn't really play them much. I only used them because of team events, but I never really played them competitively. I actually was similar to you, that I started with Eldar, but they weren't the army I ever actually competed with initially. So my foray into competitive 40k was actually with the old Fate Crusher build, the old demons with
Ugh.
Fate Weaver and Blood Crushers. So
Mm.
like, that was my first step in, because I didn't have a full Eldar army like you. I just had a smattering of units, and like, it wasn't actually built for tournament play, and it wasn't painted. So my first army I ever really put together was that demon army. And that's really where I jumped into the 40k scene, and I loved that thing. It was so much fun to play.
Yeah, I remember from last podcast. That was, you guys told me about that. That was my first exposure to hearing and like not witnessing it, but like I felt like I witnessed it because I contracted some type of cancer by listening to it.
Oh, it wasn't that bad.
It was
Compared
that
to
bad.
Grey Knights? Yeah. No, it wasn't.
Oh,
Look
it
at Grey
was.
Knights. Grey Knights and Space Wolves back then, and then Dark Eldar. Those were the top 3 back then. Grey Knights decimated everyone. The 2011 Invitational with the Strike Squad spam with Nick. Just deep strike, cover the board. You can't deep strike on. That
That's
army was
before my
okay
time.
as well.
Funnily
Yeah.
enough, Kurt, I actually beat Nick the first time we ever played with that strike spam with my drop pod army.
What?
See, now we can go real. We're going far down the catacombs here. Picking up Salamander, Drop Pod, Dreadnoughts, Fate Crusher.
Because that was my favorite thing when I was playing. Eventually, I was playing competitive with my Marines. Is drop pods. I was like, these are so cool, and like, they weren't great. But there was like,
Cool.
and there was a ton of. You could still full reserve your army at that point. Back in the annals of 40k.
That's so
right.
insane. That's so insane. Not a single
Wait.
model on the board?
Yeah.
Yep.
What the
And-
fuck?
And you didn't lose. The losing because there was nothing on the board was a
New thing.
6th edition. 6th edition was where they added that back into the game. But yeah, so people would, because drop pods would come in first turn, hot and heavy, people would go full reserve on me all the time. So that was where I came up with this like board edge trick that I pulled off twice in events. and lined the board edge with like speeders, the dreadnoughts, and the drop pods coming out. So like these Imperial Guard armies, which were the rage back then. I blocked two of them from coming on the board.
Lower list.
Yep, and those people rage kit. It was bad.
That was my first day I've ever met Sean. Actually, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was.
We were playing next to each other. He was playing his drop pods against Vinny Pow's IG, and I was playing my Fate Crusher against, I think, Brad Nichols' Deathwing. Round 1 of the Invitational in 2011. My game, getting set up, and I see Sean over here dropping pods on the other guy's side of the table. No, the guy he's playing against has this gorgeous IG army, and he has this huge like Nikon camera, and he's taking pictures of all this beautiful stuff on the table. Because Sean's army's all painted up, his stuff's all painted up. It looks great. And back in this day, there weren't as many like really fully not thematic, but well painted armies and really put together things, because the events were a lot smaller back then. So Sean's over here, a solid 2 feet taller than the guy, just placing all the power on the guy's side of the board, just fucking salamanders all over the place. And I'm just watching like, what the fuck is going on over there? I'm playing my game. And then I look over, like, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, Vinny Pow's trying to drive on his tanks, because back then you'd have to come in from your board edge. It wasn't just like, all right, you can outflank, you come in 9 inches away. You came in on your long board edge. So he had to come in on his board edge, but Sean had thrown, like, scouts or tanks here, pods here, dreadnoughts here, land speeders here. And there was a thing called tank shock back then. So basically, if you did that with infantry, you could theoretically tank shock through sometimes, depending on the unit you were tank shock, if they're fearless or not. But he had enough tanks and mech, the army was built so that he could turn two table someone, I guess, or whatever it was, because Vinny tried to reserve all of his tanks. So he put all of his tanks in reserve and board edge, and Vinny lost probably 1,500 points. And the most ridiculous I think he had 2 or 3 flyers, and he said 1 or 2 other things outflanked. I'm not going to say who was right or who was wrong. Oddly enough, one of our other friends, who didn't know Sean at the time, Dan Woods, he was the judge on the table, because back in 2011...
Dan Woods?
Table back then, because we knew Mike, and they needed judges. So every single table had a head or a judge dedicated to it for the entire tournament. No, back then. So only 16 tables, but you had a judge at each table watching the whole time. So Vinny is trying to state, like, oh, this one's outflanking, this one did this. And unfortunately, Dan had to make a ruling against Vinny in Sean's favor, where all this stuff just got decimated turn 2. So Vinny comes on with, like, 2 flyers and plays the rest of the game and just...
Sean, is that where Dan Woods became a good friend of yours? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, it wasn't till much later, but no, it was a hard thing, because he it was funny because Vinny and I had played at a tournament a couple weeks before, and I hadn't done this, and he had what the discussion was. He did outflank a couple chimeras, and that was fine, and he had like 3 little tanks, transport tanks, and the 3 vendettas that were
so
ubiquitous at the time. But what our discussion was that he had veteran squads in some of his other chimeras, but he was like, no, I always put them in the vendettas, and I was like, you didn't say they're in the vendettas, they're in the chimeras, and he was like, no, they're in the vendettas, and Danny was like, no, and I was like, and not to mention that, but we played a couple weeks ago, and they were in that chimeras a couple weeks ago, so don't tell me they're always in this. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right.
Oh, feels bad.
But no, that was nonsense. But that's been some of the classic stuff in 40K for years. Is something rises to the top, becomes like a normative list. So like that leaf blower guard list at the time was very net list at that point. So like there's always been ways to try and break net lists in creative ways, and with the drop pods, that was what I came up with, and I was like, ugh, because I can't stand it, because it was like an auto response that these mech armies would have, is they'd be like, oh, I full reserve, because you're playing drop pods, and it wasn't even something they would think about. They would just say it. They would just be like, I full reserve, and they would like look at you like they're so clever, and it's like, I knew you were gonna do that. That's what everybody's doing. Haha, got you. But no, and it's funny because we've used that drop pod army and stuff years later at events, at team events, like Kurt said. I think Danny used it maybe
ATC.
4 years ago at ATC, and so like there's a army transport bag in my house that is just loaded with drop pods and hasn't been unloaded since that event. And like, so like if we need them, we're just like, oh, get that bag, bring it out.
Is it in foam or is it just like drop pods inside there?
It's like 3 drop pods, a layer of foam, 3 drop pods, layer of foam, you know, so it's...
How many drop pods, Sean?
Don't ask me those kind of questions.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair.
I own like 17 dreadnoughts.
Yeah. And this is pre Iron Hand spam, so this is going back.
Going back in the day. Instead of having to like switch weapon options, I just get another dreadnought.
Ben, so it's a bitch to switch weapons.
No, I don't have any metal ones. They're all plastic. Yeah.
The metal ones are good.
I felt the metal one before, man. You could throw that at somebody. It'll kill them.
my Wraith Lords are metal.
Yeah.
I've been slowly replacing them with the cool plastic ones, but
I feel like the Wraith Lord isn't as dense though as like a.
Oh no, not really. And the metal Wraith Lords are really small. They're tiny.
Yeah. I still have one of the old ones too.
Oh god.
I built him wrong though, so his head's upside down. Can't fix it. It's fucking metal.
Ooh.
Wait, so he's instead of it being so he's got like this extended chin going on instead of like it being like a sperm
Just
head.
put him in the freezer.
It's like a Conan O'Brien fucking Wraith Lord.
I think he's
Or
just like that.
Jay Leno, sorry, more accurate.
Both of them got a hefty chin, I feel like. How about you, Mr. Braverman? What did you first start off with?
So my first army, I kind of had started to collect Tzeentch Chaos. I had a Terminator Lord and a War Boss were my first army for my first models. So I kind of had Tzeentch Chaos and Orcs is how I started off. I kind of got into the game because I had just finished university and martial arts was a huge part of my life. Judo, jiu-jitsu, all kinds of grappling and MMA, and I had gotten seriously hurt, so I had to take a long period of time off, and I kind of I needed something to fill the gap, and I wound up going to the local store to play D&D, and I walked in and I saw the models in the rack, and that was it for me. The second I saw them, I was in. And then later that year, I started playing. Shout out to Bobby Sinnott. He came in to advertise for, the BFS and everything and all that. And I went to the first BFS GT and got beat by Alex Fennel in the first round. Absolutely crushed. And from there, I just seeing what armies could do and what people could do with lists and stuff. I was just hooked from that moment on.
It's cool. It's nice to hear that, I also was just once I started building my first Space Marine and then Tau model, I was hooked right then and there. I mean, I've always thought the models looked great and obviously the lore is so juicy, but the whole process of it all and after you build your first couple models, you really if it doesn't hook you right there, I don't know what is. Maybe you get someone else to build your stuff and you just play with it, but it really takes a certain type of love to play the game and then enjoy it completely as a hobby, full circle,
Yeah, Kurt, who builds your models these days?
I actually enjoy building, oddly enough. Good thing you didn't pick out the painting. I can defend this.
Yeah, there we go. So when you guys picked your armies, obviously, I have I went from freaking Space Marines, Tau to Chaos to Eldar to Dark Eldar, to finally find that home in the Eldar area. Did you guys like your army straight off the bat? I know Sean, you love Eldar, so that's exactly what you're playing. Same with you, Kurt. But did you guys dislike anything about those armies at all during certain times? And did you feel like you wanted to play something else in general?
Yeah, like I said, with the modeling stuff, that's what caused me to get another army. And thankfully, when Dark Eldar came out again in 5th edition, they started to get some plastics that looked just so fresh and so amazing. And now GW's moved a lot of the things to just be gorgeous Harlequin models. There's some Eldar. It's funny that Eldar are the oldest range there, and they're the one that has the least new plastics. Harlequins are all plastic now. Dark Eldar is mostly plastic now, and then Eldar still has a bunch of stuff that it's really? Can we get some plastics for that?
And the Guardian model is still the Guardian model. And
No, it's actually not.
It isn't?
The Guardian model is different than the ones I first started with. It is
what?
different. I mean,
That's crazy.
it's not much different, but I think it is like. I'll take that back. There's like maybe a little bit of update to some of the faces or something. It's not much of an update, but yeah,
it looks
still an
virtually
old
the same.
plastic. I think there's like some small differences, or maybe it's like the snap together ones look a little different as well. That one might have been a total slight resculpt, but the main box and the gun is new, so that's why I know it's like a different kit, because the gun used to be metal and now it's plastic. So they might have used some parts of the design from the old kit, but it is a new kit in theory.
So lack of like what is it, like kit bashing? Were you kit bashing back then, Sean, or were you trying to, and why you were just like
Yeah, so like with the Eldar stuff, like I loved playing them. I loved all the things. I mean, I love Howling Banshees, who are now terrible, but at the time I loved them. And but yeah, it's all just metal old sculpts. So like there was limited access. That would be the only thing I would say is a turn off of that point. Like they've got great plastic tanks that are gorgeous. Their aesthetic is really nice, but the Eldar range itself, in terms of like infantry models, is really lackluster. They've updated some of their things now, like their base jet bikes are really good. Their newer jet bikes are really nice. Some of their new characters came out in plastic, but overall their range lacks a lot of that modeling depth, because it's so locked up into some old metal or fine cast sculpts at this point. But in terms of play style, like, yeah, I mean, I love everything about it now, and at various points, like Eldar or Dark Eldar, I treat it all as one in my head, and I'm like, whichever one is vibing with me the most is the one I gravitate towards.
well, they are all Eldar, right? So
Yeah, they all have a shared ancestry.
that's right, and they hate Slanesh.
What were you saying, Kurt?
I was actually looking at the Eldar range because I was trying to figure out which models I used to buy in those damn metal blister packs at the store for like $15 for those two little guys, the Warp Spiders, the Swooping Hawks, the Reapers, because buying models back then was honestly rough for Eldar and a lot of other armies too. Like Dark Eldar was also really rough, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah.
Finding those models first of all, and getting the right blisters, or to put a squad of Aspect Warriors together with just a local game store if that was your only source. And I actually started looking through them. Sadly, Warp Spiders are the same sculpt. They've been, I think, for I honestly don't know how many years.
Yeah, they're probably like 20, 25 years old, 20,
exactly.
22, 23 years old. They redid a bunch of the Aspect Warriors. I want to say they redid them, yeah. So they got new models, and those models look pretty good, but they were still a metal sculpt. And now it's obviously switched to fine cast. But like they did the Scorpions, the Fire Dragons, the Howling Banshees.
The Banshees are new too, and the Reapers, I think too.
And the Reapers, yeah, they redid all of them. I want to say in like the early
last year?
2000s. No, not last year. No, it was early 2000s. It was like 2009 or 10 or something like that.
I've always liked the Warp Spider.
Yeah, the only cool model in the Warp Spiders is the Exarch.
He's
pretty
baller,
cool.
though.
Yeah.
He's pretty baller. And then obviously if you go outside GW, there are some really cool alternate sculpts for Warp Spiders. But the regular Warp Spider is just so
Man, it's so boring.
80s GW. He stands straight up, gun to the right, done. You know?
With his like spider backpack.
And I have 30 of them.
It's a bad sculpt. It's so boring.
Definitely have more than 30, by the way. It's probably like 45.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Ugh. And now Banshees did get a new plastic last year.
But it's like the same sculpt though, isn't it?
It's very similar, but like the metal sculpt that preceded it is actually a really dynamic sculpt. So that's not a huge issue. It's not the one from 20 years ago. It's like 10 years old. The last metal one. It is a nice sculpt. I'm staring at metal ones on my desk right now.
Oh yeah, Sean, that reminds me. Where did you pick up that Blood of the Phoenix box? In that first Psychic Awakening book?
Oh, Mythico Studios.
Oh, that's right. I remember giving it to you. I remember that we were filming for our first battle report, and then I was like, I think we're gonna get it in today. And you're like, no way. And I was like, yeah. And then it was just like, here you go. That was pretty cool.
That was pretty great. That I'm actually in 3 weeks or 2.5 at this point. I'll be painting that Jane Zara on Twitch.
That's gonna be beautiful.
Where are you going to be doing that, Sean?
At Twitch at Team Battle Brothers.
Nice.
I don't know how Twitch works, but I think that's where it is. But yeah, I'm painting White Harlequins right now, and I'm really enjoying it. I'll do them for another 2 weeks, finish them up, and then I'm gonna move to that plastic Jane Zar, because that model, like we talked about last week, was the thing I want during this quarantine. I'm like, I haven't painted it. I'm gonna paint it now.
That model's so badass, man. That one is just
maybe I'll do her and then Drazar. I'll do the two of them.
I think the Drazar model looks amazing.
The Drazar model is dope. I still do like the old one too. Out of all like the old metal Phoenix Lord / Drazar, the Drazar is the only one that I was like, this guy is great. He's awesome looking. Him and Morgan Ra are probably the only two models out of all those that stand up still.
Morgan Ra could use an update though, in all honesty.
I mean, he totally could, but he's super stationary. He looks exactly like the Wolf Spiders. They have the same pose. But for whatever reason, it works for him because he's a single model versus like, I've got 30 Warp Spiders that all look the same.
Yeah, that's awful. I hate it.
And he's got like that huge ass fire pike, and he's just like got this axe. He's like, yeah. Pick
the
your
Maw
poison.
guitar.
Yes. Oh, that's right. The Morgan Ra. I'm thinking of fucking what's his name?
Fuegan.
Yeah, I like Fuegan. He's also super stationary as well.
He's super stationary, and for him it looks worse.
Yeah.
I don't know, for whatever it is in my mind, Fuegan should be more active. Morgan Ra, it's like, it's okay for him to just be sitting there.
Yeah.
It's like he's playing a guitar.
Yeah. So, but like the old Drazar model is really cool. I actually used to use it in games as Karandros. I would bring Karandros to the event, but I wouldn't use it because his sculpt makes me mad because it's so boring. And then I would use Drazar as Karandros, and I'd be like, if you got a problem with it, I have the real model, but don't be that guy.
And they're gonna be like, I'm gonna be that guy. And you're like, all right, way to be a dick.
No, I don't think anyone ever had a problem with it.
Yeah, no one. People usually don't.
Back then, it was all the same base for infantry almost. It was either like a little base or a big base. There weren't like different variations.
25 and 32, right? Pretty much, millimeter bases.
No, basically every infantry was on 25, even Marines, and it was only Terminators that were on 40s.
Oh, they were on 40s.
And like a couple other models and jet bike and bikes and stuff, but
then monsters and stuff.
Yeah, basically every infantry in the game was on a 25 up until like 8th edition, 7th edition was when we started to see 32 millimeter Marines and some characters. Jane Zara, she's on a 32 now.
Really?
Yep.
Insane.
Yep, her model's on a 32. I actually think the Banshees and Incubi in that box set are on a bigger base than a 25, and it might be like
it is a 28 millimeter.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's not even a 32. It's something totally weird.
Yep.
And I'm like, why?
You know why? Games Workshop. How about you, Kurt? Did you I know you were same thing with Sean, and you guys were like balls deep into Eldar. But at any point were there any grievances you had about the army, either playability or like what Sean said, like the lack of like kit bashing and like unique factor to it?
I think when I first started, I didn't have any issue with it. When I was later into the game and actually competing, after Demons, I went into Necrons. But Eldar, I never really had an issue with them. But the main thing I kind of always want with my army, not that I personally do most of the work for it. I just want my army to look cool, in all honesty, regardless of like faction. I find Eldar almost always look cool on the table, depending on the build, of course. Certain models are a little less interesting, like the old Striking Scorpions, a lot of the old mentioning. So like my number one thing is whatever army I have been playing, I want to look at it and be like, that looks sweet on the table, or intimidating, or just like sleek as hell. So when I was playing demons, it was like I got these bloody blood crusher guys, these big greater demons, and these fiends with all these arms and shit running around murdering stuff. I was like, that looks sweet on the table. So like it lines up. It was competitive. I like the play style. I like the rules, and it looked sweet at the time. So that's usually honestly one thing I always kind of go for. If it doesn't look cool on the table, I kind of feel shitty about playing with it just because it doesn't fucking look as sweet. I want it to look awesome on the table if I want to play with it all day for like 14-hour day of 3 games.
That makes sense.
So after Demons, I went into Necrons when they got a bunch of new kits. It was kind of the flavor of the month at that time, and everyone was doing it. But the new Wraiths and a lot of the Flyers looked really cool at the time. The Destroyer Lord there was no new Destroyer Lord, but it was a really cool looking army. All those new Wraith models. Sadly, they were spindly as all hell. If you guys are familiar with those whip coils, they break all the damn time, and you could barely fix them. So I had 18 Wraiths, I had 3 Night Sights, 3 Doom Sights too. I don't know if it was all on the same list, but that's what I was running after that. And the army I thought looked sweet on the table, even though it was flying around with black and green croissants all over the damn table.
Meow meow.
French
No monoliths.
Not at that time. I did have monoliths later. We went to Europe for a certain tournament, but I'm sure we'll talk about that one later.
No,
But
you had obelisks. You didn't have monoliths. You had tesseract.
Yeah,
balls.
Oh God! Did you have 3 of them?
Of course
Oh,
I did.
yeah.
They're 12 feet behind me. Trevor actually magnetized and built all of them for me. I will say that. I didn't build those whatsoever because those were way too much work. And Hannah's laughing at me in the background now. Those things did not look that cool. I played those out of necessity for the team, in all honesty. They looked average at best, in my opinion. I don't really love that model. It's a little too clunky.
The best was that you had to like take them apart and smuggle them into the country
God.
basically because they were so big that like they like took up like half of Hannah's luggage space. She was not happy that year.
Dude, those models.
Those models are super
worst.
Ugh.
3 of them in a small army transport because they were all broken apart, not broken apart, but basically segmented off into the 4 walls, and then the middle piece with the satan had the 4 prongs poking out. So I had 3 massive prongs that I think were like 9 inches by 9 inches in each direction, and then the 4 walls. So basically those all fit into a small army transport case on the plane. And every game I'd have to disassemble, or not every game, but when I started the day off, I had to figure out which magnets went to which one.
Oh God!
And they're based on color. The markings got ripped off by the magnets.
No.
So I lost the markings. So every day I'd have to spend 15, 20 minutes snapping together these things, playing basically Jenga with this shit to get it to balance and stay on there because the magnets were so heavy that you couldn't put one door on without the opposite door going on as well because they were so heavy and the magnets were so big. Because it's the only way to hold up that whole base at like 6 inches out from the center, whatever.
Yeah, that thing.
4 inches out from the center.
That thing is super
Monstrous.
unwieldy.
I haven't used them since ETC. One of our other friends brought them to BFS, which Sean got to mutilate one game in the meanest match of the world. But
That match was great. I like basically didn't deploy half my models. So I was just like, let's imagine that this space right here is this 20 guys.
He was playing a friend of ours, so it was totally kosher.
Oh my God! That model is super unwieldy though. It's and you're measuring from the base still though, aren't you?
Yeah, you only basically use the walls for it's crazy. You only use them for line of sight, but they also would stop the models from getting next to each other. So that's why you just can't play with just the base for it because parts of the army it would be really powerful if they could like literally be
on top
right next to each other because they could stack their auras on their abilities on people. But so you had to have the walls in place so that they couldn't actually do that. And,
I see.
They only moved 8 inches. They weren't fast, by the way.
No, they were slow.
6'4", I think, in movement. So like 8 inches is not a lot with those huge models, but it was an absolute chore using them. It was actually kind of fun because almost no one knew all their rules, and you would just fucking blow people's minds with the amount of mortals you would do in one turn.
Yeah.
Granted, they never saw the table again. So.
Yeah, I mean Andrew did really well with them at that BFS.
Yeah, he did because honestly, I think it's true that no one at not no one at BFS, but the vast majority of people had no clue what the Army was doing. He also was not that good with it either. I kind of gave him a crash course like 20 minutes before the tournament, but he actually did do really well. I mean, he won his first 3 games handily, and then he lost to you, but
Yeah, I think he won 4 games. 4 games.
he did.
Yeah.
I thought you played him round 1 the next day. I don't know.
Nope,
Whatever it
round
was.
2. He was mad because if he had gotten a couple more points, he would have played one of the other 2 players, and he thinks he would have then made it to the finals to still get destroyed by me. But
Worse.
it was just
Because he hopes up
it was so unfair. What was unfair was I was playing Harlequin bikes.
Oh,
which,
yes.
do haywire to vehicles, and they were vehicles. What stacked on that is I played the mass form Dreaming Shadow, where whenever one of my Harlequin bikes would die on a 4-up, they could shoot in death with their haywire gun at the tanks. I took a warlord trait. I took a warlord trait where they could, when they died, it would actually be a 3-up. They could shoot the tanks, except if the tanks were Necrons, which they were. Upon which, on a 2-up, when the bike died, it would shoot. So Andrew actually went first, killed some of the things in my army, and killed some Harlequin bikes, who then still devastated him. And then by the end of my turn 1, he had lost 2 out of the 3 Tesseract vaults.
Oh my god.
By the way, there's not much left in that army outside of the Tesseract vaults. Scarab unit, Destroyer Lord, Deceiver.
Yeah,
So he's got 3 units left.
Which is why at that point, my 3 units that were deep striking in, I was just like, this space is this 20-man unit, this space is this 20-man unit, and I was like, I'll just roll the charges to see if we get any, and we kill you for the last Tesseract vault. And he was like, ugh.
Oh god.
But it was savage. I don't know, like 45 minutes.
Oh my god.
It's good that you drew it out for him so he could enjoy it a little bit. Savor the flavor.
Well, I mean, Andrew's not the one to quit, so he fought to the bitter end.
Till the death.
Yeah. So, but no, there's been so many cool things that we've all experienced in tournament 40K, growing from Kurt at the local game store, and me at the high school club. That's like, everybody has a beginner story where they're like, oh, I just picked up the game, met somebody, or I had a friend introduce me. But you really start to grow when you do actually like step out and start attending events. Like the community at the Mythico store is great. They've got some great beginner events, some regular events, and everybody there does a great job of making it fun and friendly and competitive. And that's one of the great things. Like, Kurt and I met playing this game, and we're friends. What you said, 9-10 years later,
something like that. I think we went to ATC in 2011, was it, or 2012? I can't remember. Maybe 2012.
Something like that. And and like at this point, like, his wedding's coming up this year, and I'll be there. A couple of his other 40K friends will be there. It's like that's how much friendships can get built in this game, in this hobby. It really is the competitive scene where you start going to events to each other and encouraging each other to do better. And yes, there are negatives to competitive, and people that may take it too seriously or aren't sporting and stuff like that. But the vast majority is just so great and so positive, and it brings out everything. Like, Kurt's not a big painter, but I am a big painter, and tournaments are like that carrot, that stick. Carrot? How would you describe it? To get me to finish painting things. It's that deadline. We all exist on deadlines, right? That's the only reason we get anything done in this life is deadlines. And so a tournament is that deadline for me. It helps me really drive through to finish a squad, finish painting something, make it look its best, because like there's points for that. That along.
I think Sean accidentally dropped off here for some reason. I guess he's getting too emotional.
There we go.
I got cut out
Sean Naden.
by technology. Discord told me that it looked like I wasn't there, so they cut me out. I guess
But
I
you
wasn't
were
touching
there.
I guess I wasn't touching my mouse enough. But yeah, no, that's like when I started to figure out that there was a competitive community, that really like raised my awareness of this game and the depth in this hobby.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Kurt.
can echo that sentiment that going to these events, sure, every once in a while there'll be a bad sport, there'll be something happen, a yellow card, maybe even a red card, but that tiny arc just never outweighs all the bonuses you get from hanging out in that weekend at the tournament, at Adepticon, at LVO, at Nova, at any major tournament. You really have so much fun at those, just going to dinner with your friends, playing the games, having the war stories, effectively, we'll say. Everyone's ridiculous games of getting seized on, or ridiculous matchups, or crazy dice. Honestly, you build great friendships in this, and you immediately become friends with people just by knowing you play the game together. And it's such a quick way to build friendships and build lasting friendships as well. Like, you can go to a random RTT and make a couple new friends, and like maybe you'll see them at a big tournament and it'll blossom into like, actually, maybe you'll put a team together for a team event one year. But really is, you build a lot of great friendships, and those team events are fantastic as well. The Northeast Team Championship and ATC, hopefully they're held this year. Who knows with the coronavirus, but I really agree that adding those deadlines also does apply motivation, we'll say, to Sean and people to model great armies. Yeah. Sadly, this year Adepticon got canceled, and Sean was doing all of her painting again for that. Thanks, Sean. The other thing about that is that we don't get to go and see the displays and the ridiculous armies that people put together and spend months painting, building, and just putting hours in, days in, weeks in, because those armies look, I always find that those armies there are the best looking ones I see every year, just because of the sheer put into making those gorgeous and themed armies. The displays every year in that hall are just absolutely impressive. I think that's like the pinnacle of the hobby. That team tournament is people putting it in, good sportsmanship usually, and game.
I mean, isn't that like something that's so awesome? Is like just being able to, like you guys said, is meeting other people and like people you would have never known. Like we talked about it last podcast too. Like you and Kurt, you and Sean and Kurt, like rather like you guys were never known each other, you know, unless you guys played 40K. And like I know it's a testament to like not just at Mythicos, but like at every local game store. I can imagine almost every single one. Like people just sharing that, you know, that common ground of like, oh, you play 40K, so do I. Like, what do you play? And you know, right then and there, that's it. You know, you guys are friends unless that guy's a dick, obviously.
Unless he's that
guy. But yeah, you know, I also think that it really is a testament to other people like Sean and other guys that do a lot of painting when some guy looks at your model and like, wow, this is really well painted. And I feel like for a newer person or just a person that's been doing it for a while, like that, hearing that little bit always goes a long way. That's what I think. You know, I don't really do much of the hobby, and like I said, you know, I get other people to do my painting for me, but I know for a fact that, you know, every time someone looks at my models and someone's like, oh, this looks really good, I'll be like, thanks, man. I feel a little bit of like gratitude for them, but obviously, you know, I didn't paint them.
Yeah, Kurt, how do you feel when people say your models look good?
I feel great. I feel like I have really good friends, and then what I usually do is I tell Rubino, because his usually get complimented the most, unlike some other people. So I text Rubino immediately after and be like, yo, this guy just said your night spinner was hot fire. And I'll tell him, and he's like, fuck yeah. So he gets amped up and gets excited to hear that people are fucking eye-sexing up his fucking night spinners.
Oh, God.
And, you know, it happens all the time. Some models on Armies do, some models don't. I don't know. What do you think?
Savage.
Oh, God. That's so good.
But I never tell people I paint any of my stuff, just because the last thing I want to do is get an overall award for something I didn't paint, because that'd be the grimiest shit ever. I'm sorry. I have no respect for anyone who takes credit for somebody else's paint. Yeah. That shit's fucked up.
Oh, that brings me up, though. Kurt, you brought up a good point just right there. If you guys were judging in a painting competition and someone said that their models were pro-painted by someone else, would you like even give them any points for anything like that, or would you guys just totally like be like, no, they didn't paint their stuff, so they're not gonna get that award?
I don't think you should win a best painted award.
Yeah, definitely.
For the commissioned army, but I have no problem with it going towards like overall or a red man award. None at all.
Andrew, what do you think? Because you do a lot of painting yourself too.
Yeah, I do a fair bit. I kind of stand with Sean. I don't think you should be getting like best painted or one of those, but it should go towards, I think, the overalls. You are bringing a nicely painted nicely painted models and nicely coordinated army. So you are bringing it, you are presenting it. So I think towards the overall score, sure. But like I said, I think it should be excluded from winning like hobby master or best painted, things along those lines.
Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, Sean, would you be butthurt if you were like, say, second overall behind somebody who got best overall? They got it pro painted. Somebody else who just gets some army pro painted. Would you be a little slighted because they got best overall because their paint score wasn't them at all, and you'd be fine with it because maybe you guys had the same battle score or close enough? Not bittersweet, but it hurt a little bit, I assume. Not that I would have any vested interest.
I don't. It would depend. If someone tried to pass it off as their own, if they're fully up, like, hey, I spent 12 grand on this. I spent 4 grand on this.
Yep.
I got no problem with it. You know what I mean? Because painters got to eat.
True.
I don't do that many commissions. I've done some, and I wouldn't want a player that I painted for it to be like, oh, I can't win an awards. No, the shit looks good. It looks good. You know what I mean? That's it. That's the end of the day. Because if, let's say, 80% of the people got commissioned armies and the other 20% painted, the armies look good, and then every tournament you went to, everything looked amazing, that'd just be better. You know what I mean? So like, I wouldn't want to discourage commission painting or anything like that, because I think if the people that are like, hey, I don't really like to paint, I can't really paint, or like I'm working on my painting but I'm not there yet, but I still want to be in line for these awards and stuff like that, so they spent the money and fed an artist, I'm totally on board with that. Like, power to it.
For
So
sure.
that's my opinion on it. Is that it's not just about, hey, would you be butthurt? It's like, he beat me on the table. Like, there's not really that much disparity in terms, because most paint rubrics, if they're done right and for overall scoring, if they're done correctly, there's not much that they can gain over me in a paint score. So it'll basically, if their army therefore is compatible with mine in terms of paint, it's going to come down to which one of us played better. So that's fine.
One example I just like to give before we skip topics. I think it was, I don't remember which year at Nova was. I don't know if any of you guys were there. There was this gorgeous yellow and I forget what the rest of the colors was. Like yellow and purple. It was an Eldar army, and I believe he was going to either win best painted or not best conversion. I think it was best painted, and it was his friend in Russia, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, who actually painted it, and he turned down the award, and it went to somebody else because he didn't want to take credit for it there or take the award.
That's a good man.
There was a good example of that at Nova a couple of years, several years ago.
Like that's what I'm saying. That's a painted award, versus the overall. I'm more okay with it. I wouldn't want somebody to win it for a best painted, with a commission army. But for everything else, I think, commission army should be encouraged because it just makes the games prettier.
It helps the hobby too. You're allowing painters to do it professionally, so that there can be more people who actually can do it out there and make a living off of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things like we've noticed the most with this virus and stuff like that is that artists of all kinds, painters, musicians, all those things, writers, those are the only things that we have, like access to right now, movies and stuff like that. Like all that art, it has to be paid for by somebody. It has to be encouraged, you know what I mean? So there's definitely no problem with that from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the same. I feel the same way with you guys, like about like the whole pro painted and just in general with the whole hobby, like now during this whole virus, like really just kind of expanding. And I've heard many people like from guys who buy models at the store and like sending their like models to get built and painted by people like overseas or locally, which is nice. Like you said, Sean, painters still got to eat.
Painters got to eat. Feed them.
And if you don't have time in real life, say you're working huge shifts every single day, 6-7 days a week, got multiple kids, maybe you have the financial means to do it, so you can pay someone to do it, and maybe you don't have the time.
Exactly. So that's the only what's the currency we have in this life is time. Right? That's all we have, right? We have time. That's all we pay for that by going to a job, and then then we have to spend our free time doing something. It's like, well, I'd rather spend my free time playing the game or hanging out with my wife or hanging out with my kids or all those things. So you're like, okay, so I don't have time to paint, but I've put in this. I have this money from using my time at my job, so I can pay this guy to paint, and then I can still enjoy having a beautiful army when I play.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, like you guys said, like that's really like amazing how some people can just really make a living off of painting and hobbying. It's happened more, I feel, recently, even though I'm like still new to the hobby. I feel like with eighth edition like really rising, even seventh edition being as popular as it was and not popular at the same time, I feel like that was really maybe a catalyst for everyone to really come out of the woodworks and kind of make this their life, right?
yeah, and like there's again, people have said there are some like overseas painters that are just just the cost of living is less in their country, so their prices beat a lot of homegrown prices, and that's a trade-off people make. But there's some amazing artists that do it here in the States, and like the if anyone Googles GMM Studios, that dude, I think his name's Jason. Like, oh my God, it's one dude, and the
Only
work
one
he
guy?
puts in, yeah, it's oh my, I've heard that he's just ridiculously fast, and it's just like the amount of work he puts in and puts out, like, and it's gorgeous. Like he's like him and Dark Bunny Creatives. Those are two like my favorite studios. But the GMM guy is just it's gross.
Really,
So
more power to all those guys and girls, and that's amazing. I never thought if I if you came up to me and told me somebody made their living off of painting models and I had no exposure to like this hobby, I would just tell you you guys are freaking crazy. But like being in the hobby, I see it even firsthand when pro painters and people that do commissions and stuff, like they come into my store and they buy like all these paints. Like, I always ask them like, what do you got? Like, what are you working on? And they're like, oh, I've just got this new commission going on with all these different models, and this guy wants this type of scheme. And it really is really amazing that the hobby can support not only just your own like satisfaction in playing and building and painting, but also as a livelihood for actual painters. Again, I can't say it enough. More power to all those guys, and to you, Sean, too, and to you, Braverman, as well. Me and Kurt, we get other people to do our
Fucking
stuff, right?
shit over there. See how it is.
Well, that's it for today's podcast, guys. I wanted to thank you guys all for listening on to this second episode of our Mythic Wartable Gaming podcast, and we hope to see you guys on the next episode.